The genesis of Sourcewater came from two basic insights. First of all, the one ingredient that's really new in unconventional energy production now, or hydraulic fracturing, is the need to use water for producing oil and gas. That's completely new and has only become a phenomenon in the last 5 or 6 years. About 70% of hydraulic fracturing takes place in areas that are considered water stressed. So West and South Texas, Colorado, North Dakota, Oklahoma, a few other places. What happens if you're a water manager for oil and gas production, let's say in Midland, Texas, and you've been planning to complete 5 wells that are coming up for the last 12 months. You arrange your water supply, maybe you got a permit for a groundwater well 6 months ago, 12 months ago. Well, now it's time to go pick up the water because you actually need it in a few days. You send a fleet of 1,000 trucks to pick up the water from the groundwater well, because one well needs between 1,000 and 2,000 truck trips of 110 barrel trucks of water. Just one well. And you're probably planning 5 or 10 wells. So you send the trucks to pick up the water and you find out, you know what, there's a record drought on and the well's dry. You thought you had a well that you planned for 12 months ago to pull the water from, and the water's just not there. Or because of the drought, the groundwater authority put a freeze on pulling that water out of the ground because they want to conserve it. What do? You've got a delay cost of $400,000 a day that's going to start in a couple of days, and you don't have the water to start well completions. And so thinking about being in the shoes of that person, I thought, where do you get the water you need? I mean, there's no water yellow pages. There isn't even a market. I mean, who's your next call when the truck driver calls you and says, there's no water here? There's nobody. You know, you're basically calling your buddies to see if they have anything extra, and it's not that easy to come up with 10 million gallons of water. That could just be for one well. 5 wells, it could be 50 million gallons of water that you need in a couple of days, and you don't know where you're going to get it. So the basic insight that came from that is what they need is a market. You need better information. You need lots of sources, small and large, so that if any one of them falls through, there are dozens more you can turn to fill that order on short notice at different prices, different locations, different qualities, but at least you can get it. The other basic insight that led to the creation of Sourcewater is that the oil and gas industry actually produces about 10 times as much water as it consumes. People don't think about that because you hear that hydraulic fracturing or fracking is using all this water in these areas, but actually oil and gas wells produce way more water than they produce oil or gas. And that water is usually called produced water, and a lot of it is water that's been basically stewing underground for the last 100 million years. And there's not a whole lot you can do with it unless you really heavily treat it. But it turns out that there's very little treatment needed to be able to reuse that water in place of fresh water in a new oil or gas well. So in other words, the oil and gas industry actually creates far more water than it consumes. And it's also in the fairly unique position of being able to use that water, use the wastewater, to completely replace the fresh water that it's consuming in these areas. And so in the context of the marketplace, what's so interesting about that is the oil and gas industry is actually its best source. It's both the use of water, but it's also the best source of water. So the challenge there is there's all of this wastewater around, but there's no way to find it today. There's no way to connect the sources and the uses, or the supply and demand, for non-fresh water. There's a well-established system from hundreds of years of sourcing fresh water. You file for your permits, you drill a well, there are surface water rights, but all these things are for fresh water. There's never been a system for finding non-fresh water because no one's ever had a use for it before. But now there is a use, and so the best source for that use happens to be the oil and gas industry itself. And so it was those two insights, basically, that oil and gas producers without a marketplace are at a great risk of a very expensive supply chain disruption when they're operating in water-stressed areas, and a marketplace can help them address that. And the other side of it is that wastewater from oil and gas production that has long been looked at as a nuisance or essentially as a liability, something that you have to pay to dispose of, can actually be turned into an asset, and the problem can become the solution. And that's what we're trying to do with Sourcewater.